Chapter 4. There exists an agent which is natural and divine, material and spiritual, a universal plastic mediator, a common receptacle of the vibrations of motion and the images of forms, a fluid and a force which may be called in some way the imagination of nature. The existence of this force is the great arcanum of practical magic. The magical agent to which Levy makes reference here is the substance of the formative world, or more particularly the sphere of Yesod, a Hebrew word which may be translated as the foundation or the basis. The direct equivalent of the Kabbalistic Yesod in the Theosophical philosophy, as laid down by Madame Blavatsky, and here I shall follow the broad outlines laid down in her system, and that formulated in Transcendental Magic by Levy, is known as the astral light, defined in some places as an omnipresent and all-permeating fluid or medium of extremely subtile matter. This light is diffused throughout all space, interpenetrating and pervading every visible form and object. To state this idea in another way, it is a four-dimensional plane composed of a luminous etheric substance in a highly tenuous state, electric, magnetic, and radioactive in its nature. This ambient and all-penetrating fluid, this ray detached from the sun's splendor and fixed by the weight of the atmosphere and by the power of central attraction, this body of the Holy Ghost, which we call the astral light, and the universal agent, this electromagnetic ether, this vital and luminous caloric, is represented on ancient monuments by the girdle of Isis, which twines in a love knot round two poles, by the bull-headed serpent, by the serpent with the head of a goat or a dog, in the ancient theogonies, by the serpent devouring its own tail, emblem of prudence and of Saturn. It is the winged dragon of Medea, the double serpent of the Caduceus, and the tempter of Genesis, but it is also the brazen snake of Moses, encircling the Tau, that is, the generative lingam. It is the Hyle of the Gnostics, and the double tail which forms the legs of the solar cock of Abraxas. In these terms of symbols, eloquent and quaintly expressive in their way, although to the casual reader smacking of verbosity, does the French magus describe the astral light. They are highly interesting and significant symbols, and if much care and attention be given to their interpretation, they tend to considerable edification and may be made to yield up much valuable information, aiding in the intellectual comprehension, at least of the nature and characteristics of this subtle plane, vibrating at another rate of motion than does the gross substance of the physical world, and thus existing on a higher plane. The astral light contains the builder's plan or model, so to speak, projected downwards by the ideation or imagination of the Father, the plan on which the external world is constructed, and within whose essence lies latent potentiality of all growth and development. All the forces and ideas from the creative and archetypal realms are represented and focused in this plastic agent, the formative world. It is at once substance and motion, the movement being one which is simultaneous and perpetual in spiral lines of opposite motion. It was the late Lord Salisbury, I may interpolate here, who defined the ether as the nominative of the verb to undulate. In many respects, this formative world, the recipient of the higher creative forces, is comparable in its lowest aspect to the ether of science. There is, however, this exception. The astral light has been in the past and may in the future be verified by direct visional experience. The scientific conception of ether today is radically different from what the scientists of 50 years ago meant by the luminiferous ether. So much so that, judged by his standards and speaking his language, the modern idea of ether and its radiation waves are not realities at all, and yet, strangely enough, remarks Sir James Jeans in The Mysterious Universe, the ether is one of the most real things, quote, of which we have any knowledge or experience, and so is as real as anything possibly can be for us, end quote. The entity which the experimental physicists today would define as ether must be one which would respond qualitatively and quantitatively to their instruments and mathematical equations. On the other hand, when the theurgists refer to the magnetic and electric substances of the astral light, a metaphysical condition or state of substance is implied, one which at present cannot be measured or observed with physical instruments, although its existence is corroborated in identical terms by a succession of trained seers and magicians. It lies, as already stated, on an altogether different plane of existence and consciousness, and its particles vibrate in such a way and at such a high rate of motion as to be quite invisible and imperceptible to our ordinary exterior sense apparatus. Recent years have seen, in the realm of scientific speculation, the development of the electromagnetic theory which, for practical purposes of physics, discards as unnecessary the Victorian hypothesis of an all-pervading, undulating, luminiferous ether. In its stead there has been set up as on a lofty throne, crowned and worshipped with devotion and even more abstract mathematical conception, the space-time manifold or continuum. One group of scientists are wholly in favor of retaining the ether hypothesis, while several others, no less well known and no less authoritative, are equally certain that no such subtle structure as an ether is existent or even possible. They admit it only as a theoretical frame of reference, in which case it assumes the role of a working hypothesis, without any degree of objective actuality. Yet an examination of the scientific definitions of both these scientific groups reveals the fact that by the ether and the four-dimensional space-time continuum, one and the same concept is entertained. Sir Arthur Eddington, in one of his recent works, when making reference to these two scientific concepts, expressed the belief that both parties mean exactly the same thing and are divided only by words. Sir James Jeans, in his previously mentioned work, observes cautiously with regard to this obscure question, that it seems appropriate to discard the word ether in favour of the more modern term manifold or continuum, although the essential principle of function is almost entirely unchanged. Elsewhere in the same learned book, the statement is made by the erudite scientist that all the phenomena of electromagnetism may be thought of as occurring in a continuum of 4 dimensions, 3 of space welded to 1 of time, in which it is impossible to separate the space from the time in any absolute manner. I recommend particularly this observation because it is more or less in the nature of an exact confirmation of what the more eminent magicians of all times have written concerning the anima mundi, or the Azoth. Jean's further remarks may very roughly be stated that if we wish to visualize the propagation of light waves and electromagnetic forces by thinking of them as disturbances in an ether, our ether may be thought of as a four-dimensional structure filling up the whole continuum and so extending through all space and all time, in which case we all enjoy the same ether. This scientific ether which all can enjoy and which extends through space and time, serving as the medium for vibrations of all kinds, differs in a few essentials from Levy's astrolight. The definition perennially insists upon the theurgists concerning this etheric plane, that it is a grade of refined plastic substance, less dense and gross than that which we normally see around us, magnetic and electric in nature, serving as the real ground upon which the forms and congeries of atoms in the physical universe arrange themselves. It is that plane which, in its lowest aspect, is the veriest cesspool of the universe, comprising that facet of consciousness which directs the instincts and energies of animals. In its higher ramifications, soaring beyond this mundane sphere, it actually borders on the divine. That this is so may be realized by reference to the tree of life, on which the formative world is seen to include not only the sphere of Yesod, but in that classification of the tree into the four worlds, it will be perceived to extend far beyond Yesod to include Tifereth, the house of the soul, even to the edge of the abyss. The sphere of the foundation is only its most inferior phase. As Yesod alone, it is that gross region of the metaphysical cosmos containing the cast-off astral remnants of living creatures and bestial and mental filth sloughed off by human beings in the ascent after death to higher spheres. In its aspects of Hesed and Geburah, it is the most celestial heaven, so to speak, the devachanic abode. With reference to this mode of consideration, it is occasionally termed the divine astral and the soul of the world. It is in itself a blind force, but can be directed by the leaders of souls, who are spirits of action and energy. This is at once the whole theory of prodigies and miracles, how in fact could both bad and good force nature to expose her exceptional forces. How could the reprobate, erring, perverse spirit have in some cases greater power than the spirit of justice? So powerful in its simplicity and wisdom, if we do not assume the existence of an instrument which all can make use of under certain conditions, on the one side for the greatest good, on the other for the greatest evil. I wish to insist most strongly upon this dual interpretation of the magical ether which Levi gives here, and that in it is included a base inferior element and an ennobling superior element. The former is seat of the self-made, cause of many of the ills of mankind, the latter being the central fire and the soul of the world. The divine astral is solar and celestial in nature, whereas the gross astral is lunar, reflective, and purely automatic. Blavatsky confirms this hypothesis of the dual nature of the astral light in these words. The astral light, or anima mundi, is dual or bisexual. The ideal male part of it is purely divine and spiritual. It is the wisdom, it is the spirit or purusha, while the female portion is tainted, in one sense, with matter, is indeed matter, and therefore is evil already. End quote. Needless to say, it is entirely with the higher superior regions of the astral light, the solar fires, that the theurgist is concerned. From the practical viewpoint, this plane is the magical agent to which the accumulated trained vision of the theurgists has assigned the power of transmitting vibrations and impressions, not alone of physical light, heat, and sound, but those more subtle and less tangible vibrations, nonetheless real. However, because of their imperceptibility, which pertain to projected currents of will, thought, and feeling, Levy terms this instrument of the imagination of nature, inasmuch as it is ever alive with rich forms and exotic dreams, luxurious images, the immediate vehicle of the mental and emotional faculties. The control of this plane constitutes, from one point of view, the great work. Some magicians, including the distinguished Levy, were of the opinion that the central magical secret is that of the willed direction of this arcanum, being the vehicle wherein are dynamically recorded the passions and thought impressions of all mankind, the memory of lower nature, and being present on the earth all the time, inasmuch as it is all permanent, but one plane removed from the physical. Its contents must influence enormously the minds of weak and sensitive men. Not only the latter, but most of the children of earth are influenced in some way by the currents rippling through its substance. Hence, to place oneself in isolation from its blind undulations, and to transcend it utterly, as to move in that higher stratum, which is its soul, is no mean accomplishment, but one worthy of all the energies of men. One modern magical authority, the pseudonymous Therion, states that in the upper strata of the astral light, two or more objects may occupy the same space at the same time without interfering with each other or losing their outlines. In that light, objects can change their appearance completely without suffering change of nature. The same thing can reveal itself in an infinite number of different aspects. In that light, one is swift without feet and flying without wings. One can travel without moving and communicate without conventional forms of expression. In connection with the process of traveling in the body of light, the authority whom I cite above mentions, in addition, that there one is insensible to heat, cold, pain, and other forms of sensuous apprehension, and in this light one is bound by what superficially may appear to be an entirely different series of laws. On this plane, which is the magical agent par excellence, symbols and emblems and sigillae are not intellectual conventions, nor even arbitrary representations of universal ideas and natural forces. They are absolute living entities, having on this plane an independent real life and existence of their own. At first sight this may not appear important, but this statement is actually of the utmost importance in magical work. Symbols represent on the astral plane real and tangible entities. In a previous chapter, it was endeavored to demonstrate the numbers were profoundly indicative of evolutionary and developmental processes, and were synthetically expressive both of cosmic rhythm and certain occult forces and intelligences which we have named gods, Dhyan Chohans, and essences. To these numbers, representing tremendously powerful forces, various sigillae and pictographs are applicable, having in this formative world an existence which is not at all symbolic in the sense that we normally understand this term, but real, vital, and living. In the plastic, malleable substance of the astral light, these symbols can be galvanized into activity by a trained will and imagination. Its substance is peculiarly susceptible to the flights and workings of the imagination, the latter possessing the power to transform its perpetual flux and shapelessness into molds and matrices which the will can stabilize and energize powerfully in a given direction. Instances, among numerous others, are on record of a pregnant woman receiving a nervous shock, and the impression is immediately transferred through the medium of the imagination, acting upon the astral light to the forming fetus born within her womb. Historically, the goddesses presiding among the ancients over childbirth were goddesses of the moon and hence of the astral light. The moon is thought of among such races as possessing greater power to quicken the growth of life, plants, and all vegetation than even the sun itself. It has always been considered as the planet of change and of generation and fertility. In the secret doctrine, there is a good deal of out of the way information and speculation concerning the occult relationship of the moon to our planet, although merely to know that such a relationship does exist is enough for practical purposes on the part of the novice. The connection of the moon with the astral light, however, is quite valid, most authorities on this point being in complete accord. Astrologically, the moon is the planet symbolizing change and flux, and the continual alterations of forms, the shifting of conditions. On the astral plane, the trained vision has recorded that forms change their shape, color, and size there in the most extraordinary way, and to the novice in scrying it is a most disconcerting and puzzling phenomenon to have one set of perceptions fade away under one's very nose to be replaced by another shifting of scenes, which the same fate very soon after occurs. It is a fluctuating kaleidoscope of phenomena, the figures, forms, and energies being never for a moment quiescent. Hence, to establish a relationship between the moon and the astral light is a perfectly obvious correspondence. Moreover, it was observed that the moon did not shine by its own inward and self-generated light, but reflected the radiance from the sun. Yesod, the sphere of Luna, and the tree of life is placed immediately under Tifereth, the sphere of the sun, thus reflecting the creative forces from above. There are a number of other highly significant reasons, too numerous to mention here, accounting for this association of the moon with the astral light, although study and magical experience will prove the validity and accuracy of the correspondence. In the legends of every people, even the most primitive savage tribes, there enters the conception of the astral light as the medium of thought vibrations and of magical acts. Sir J.G. Fraser, the eminent anthropologist and authority in folklore, records a number of them in his Golden Bough. A number of others have also discussed the nature of this hypothetical force recognized by the primitives, without having approached to any clear formulation of its nature. A number of others have also discussed the nature of this hypothetical force recognized by the primitives, without having approached to any clear formulation of its nature as the great magical agent. This could hardly be expected, inasmuch as the studies and researches never for an instant leave the academic plane. The Melanesians of the South Sea Isles believe, as Professor Bronisław Malinowski records in his booklet on myths, in a storehouse or reservoir of supernatural or magical force, which they have called mana, like a similar force conceived as Orenda by the North American Indians, is believed to have its center in the moon. The latter seems to contain a huge tank, as it were, of the occult power which would appear to be associated by them with the source of life and energy. Not difficult it is to see that this conception, whether imperfectly recorded by the anthropologists or inaccurately described by the primitives, it is hard to say. The probability is that the fault lies with both parties. This conception, I say, is a very vague formulation of that reality which in magic we call the astral light. It was recognized quite clearly, however, by the Egyptian theurgists, and in connection therewith one is troubled by no vague theories or descriptions. For we observe that almost every yard of the so-called upper and underworlds, Amentet and the Duat, which are the two aspects, inferior and superior, of the astral plane, is carefully mapped out by its qualities noted. Not only so, but in some of the chapters of the Book of the Dead, each subdivision is described with precision for the benefit of the deceased, and incidentally for the theurgist, together with the names of the guardians and watchers of the pylons, through which the defunct soul had to pass in order to gain admission to some other of the halls in the kingdom of Osiris. In repeating the Egyptian view, Budge quotes that the Duat was not considered underground nor in the sky, or on its confines, but it was located on the borders of the visible world. That it was not a particularly happy place is described in the Book of the Dead, when the scribe Ani arrived there, seemingly bewildered. There is neither water nor air there. Its depth is unfathomable. It is as dark as the darkest night, and men wander about here hopelessly. A final observation from the venerable keeper of Egyptian antiquities in the British Museum is that the Duat was a region of destruction and death, a place where the dead rotted and decayed, a place of abomination and horror and terror and annihilation. That this coincides perfectly with the inferior astral spheres of disintegration, or Kamaloka, goes without saying. The divine astral was known as the kingdom of Osiris or Amentet, also named the Island of Truth, whither no soul could be conveyed after his decease until he had been declared true of word by the gods at the great reckoning. One corner of this region was specially set apart for the dwelling place of beatified souls, where Osiris, as the god of truth, was the hope and eternal consolation of the spiritually minded. Theosophically, Amentet could be named Devachan, the abode of the gods, and from a theurgic viewpoint it would occupy the part of the Azoth which we have termed the divine astral. According to the Book of the Dead, there are 7 great halls and 21 pylons giving entry to this celestial region. To each of the 21 pylons there being 2 sacred watchers or guardians. In another portion of this book, the names of the heralds and doorkeepers, together with the formulae of practical magic by which they may be overcome, and an entry effected to the Island of Truth, are given at some length. So very precise in their thinking were the Egyptian magicians, that they imagined correspondences between the various divisions of Egypt and the metaphysical realms of the Duat and the Amentet. Each of the several strata or regions in the astral world, both gross and divine, was mapped out with a precision which even today has neither rival nor equal. There is another very significant comparison to which attention should be directed. Among official psychoanalysts, there is the concept of the unconscious. This term implies a dynamic stream of thought, memory, and tendency which runs below the level of our normal individual consciousness, serving as the receptacle of instincts and race memories, and those complexes which are ofttimes the result of conscious conflict. As this collection of instincts and automatic impulses has an evolutionary origin long anterior to the formation and development of the intellect in man, it is hence more powerful and urgent within him. It is from the strata of habit and inherited race consciousness that the primitives are supposed to have drawn in the fabrication of their eloquent myths and legends. These latter are thus only a record of prehistoric race history, but a dynamic expression of what these psychologists would call the collective unconscious, inasmuch as with every primitive race and people, regardless of whether there was a social intercourse and communication or not, the myths and legends essentially are identical. Since what the analysts call the unconscious is practically synonymous with one aspect of what the Kabbalists term the nefesh, and since the latter is grounded in the astral light in as much the same way as the physical body is grounded upon and formed from gross matter, then between the astral light and the concept of the collective unconscious, there is a clear correspondence. Just as the unconscious with some individuals is a subterranean volcanic entity tearing asunder the integrity and unity of the consciousness, so also the magical tradition is that it is to the lower aspect of the astral light, the storehouse of race memories, predatory lusts, instincts, and all animal impulses, that a greater part of mankind owes its troubles, ills, and regrettable sources of conflict. It is upon this part of the nefesh, or the unconscious, that the magician, avers Levi, must set his foot, that it must be conquered, controlled, and kept in its proper place. At the same time, however, the so-called unconscious, with its wealth of animated material, its fertility of impressive ideas and suggestions, may be for some people the source of poetic and artistic inspiration. This aspect of the unconscious, the higher or divine aspect of the astral light or the neshama in man, it is which the magician seeks to cultivate and expand, since with its growth, development, and facility of expression proceeds also his own individual integrity and the ability to surpass himself. Within this astral light, which individually we carry with us at all times and in all places, we live and move and have our being. Every thought that we think stamps an indelible impress on our impressionable substance of that plane. In fact, tradition has it that it coalesces with one of the creatures of the plane and then passes away from our immediate control into the pulsating ocean of vitality and feeling to influence other minds for good or for ill. Every living thing breathes and intakes this light freely, and to none is it exclusive or private. Indeed, in it we live very much as a fish lives in water, surrounded on all sides and in every direction. And like a fish, we constantly breathe it in and out through astral gills, as it were, taking energy therefrom and adding a variety of impressions thereto with the passing of each moment. Not only is this magical agent the imagination of nature, but it also fills the role of the memory of nature for each act that we perform. Each thought that enters our brain, each emotion as it leaves the heart registers itself on the astral matter, remaining there for all time as an eternal record, so that those who are able to make, see and read. On this topic, Eliphas Levi has significantly remarked that the Book of Consciences, which according to the Christian doctrine will be opened on the last day, is nothing more than the astral light in which we are preserved the memory of every logos, that is, every action and every form. There are no solitary acts, and there are no secret acts. All that we truly will, that is, all we confirm by our deeds, is written in the astral light. While some think that for the theurgist there could scarcely be anything more interesting and illuminating than to examine the memory of that light, yet in reality the theurgist does not do so, for it possesses neither interest nor practical utility for him. His one object being the acquisition of self-knowledge and divine union. It would be little short of a waste of valuable time to engage in the transliteration of this record, although it is necessary for the magician to investigate the nature of this light in his body of light, and to have familiarized himself with the variegated aspects of consciousness which this plane continually presents. So far as his own work is concerned, he ever seeks to ascend to the more fiery spiritual realms. His interest in the astral light is that, being a dynamic magnetic plane, it serves more readily and adequately than anything else to focus the forces and intelligences with which he aspires to come into contact. Secondly, because in that light, or in its superior strata, he may perceive himself in reflection, as others see him, as it were, and thus acquire reliable data leading to self-knowledge. Separating the good from the evil, the solar divine ether from the malefic lunar ether, a division automatically occurs in this light. On this plane, the impure thought of man would appear to continue for a longer period of time than the good, because the latter simply ascend to the higher strata, to the regions of harmony and the upper portions of the formative world. The result is that the astral light, whose lunar space is peopled with the coarser and malicious elements of being, gradually becomes more and more contaminated, its filth hanging over mankind like a toxic death-dealing shroud. In the books of the Kabbalah, the constituents of this poisonous power likened to the qliphothe, or the excremental shells of the lowest grades of existence. They are the averse cortices, dog-faced demons, according to the Chaldean oracles, in whom there is no trace of virtue, showing never to mortals any sign of truth. It is this aspect of the astral light which for each man is the evil seducing serpent of Genesis, and it is that blind aspect which must be transcended by the theurgist, since being represented in his own constitution, it is that which hinders the accomplishment of the great work. Were this process of filling the astral plane with qliphothe to continue indefinitely, without any adequate means of ridding it and effecting a purification, it would result in the total poisoning of the human race by its own vile emanations. Despite the efforts of the meagre band of mystics and theurgists down through the ages, who transmute by their own life and spiritual attainment the base elements into an abiding and gracious good, nevertheless the evil becomes top-heavy, so to speak. The excessive malefic force is then precipitated in accordance with natural and cyclic laws. In the forms of disastrous convulsions of nature do these precipitations of astral impurity occur. Earthquakes, elemental fires, and floods, and cataclysmic crimes and diseases are some of its manifestations. Writing profoundly in the confirmation of this view, Eliphas Levi registers the conviction that the astral light is the mysterious force whose equilibrium is social life, progress, civilization, and whose disturbance is anarchy, revolution, barbarism, from whose chaos a new equilibrium at length evolves. The cosmos of a new order when another dove has brooded over the blackened and disturbed waters. This is the force by which the world is upset and seasons are changed, by which the night of misery and misrule may be transfigured into the day of Christ, into the era of a new civilization, when the morning stars sing together and all the sons of God utter a joyful shout. Thus, at the same time, the astral light is a nimbus of the utmost sanctity, as well as a vile serpent of destruction, the highest conception of a celestial realm, as well as the basest hell of depravity. It is through the channels of the astral light that universal calamities are effected, and if anarchy and catastrophes are the result of its equilibrium and disturbance, it follows that by this means also can a new and improved order of equilibrium and harmony be instituted upon the earth, even in our own time. A more gracious civilization may thus be the outcome of our present haphazard passage through chaos and ignoble confusion. Here then lies a key to hand. Some have accused the theurgists of being selfish, in that he first appears to strive for his own salvation. In reality, it is to this great accomplishment, to this transfiguration of the world of misrule into a brighter aeon, that he has sworn, to be the unseen and silent herald of a new and better world. On the surface it may seem that he attempts to attain a degree of spiritual consciousness for himself alone, and that he cares not at all for the welfare of mankind, but his efforts to attain divinity eventually reacts to the utmost advantage upon the normal run of mankind. I, said one sage, if I be lifted up, will lift all mankind with me. So it is with the theurgist, Proclus has observed, that by means of the magical invocations and the spiritual union the divine essences seem, after a manner, to come down to the world and incarnate amongst the ranks of men. When the theurgist has consummated union with the universal soul, and become one with the great essences constituting the soul and directing intelligence of Adam Kadmon, the heavenly man, to be actually of incomparable service to mankind, lies well within his power. For mankind will have been supremely exalted by the descent of the gods to make the necessary changes in the plastic substance and archetypes of the formative world, which will work themselves out accordingly on the physical plane to help elevate the minds of men and restore the eternal harmony and order of the spheres. Sources of life and being will then be a definite possibility, but until the magician has himself instituted harmony within the sphere of his own consciousness, his power is limited, until beauty and illumination are the order of his own life, and until he has equilibrated that sphere with the universal essences, the everlasting centers of light and life sustaining the universe in all its branches, he cannot bring ultimate fulfillment to this utopian dream of mankind.